The warmth of her own blood was a shocking contrast to the cold hospital floor. Elena Carter, 8 months pregnant, had just been struck by her husband. She hit the ground hard, her hands flying to her stomach in a desperate attempt to protect her unborn child. She pleaded for help, for anyone to save her baby, but her calls were met with silence.
Thank you so much. My
Instead,
pleasure.
her husband's mistress appeared in the doorway, and she was smiling, actually smiling. The woman then walked over, knelt down, and whispered something so unbelievably cruel, it will make your skin crawl. And this is the part that will truly break your heart. Elena's best friend of a decade, the one person who knew all her secrets, was part of the whole scheme. She had just helped steal every cent Elena had, wiping out $400,000 in less than 15 minutes. In a single moment, Elena was left with no husband, no money, and no best friend. She was bleeding on the floor of a hospital, on the verge of losing her baby, completely and utterly alone. At least, that's what she believed. But 200 miles from there, a phone began to ring inside a billionaire's lavish apartment. That call came from a woman lost in dementia, a woman who had guarded a 30-year-old secret about a father Elena never even knew she had. What unfolds from this moment will astound you. It will tear at your emotions, but in the end, it will serve as a powerful reminder that justice often appears when we least expect it. Make sure you stick around for the entire story, because you will not see the final twist coming. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you are joining from today. And if this story touches you, please consider hitting that subscribe button. With one simple click, you will be sure not to miss any more stories like this one. Now, let's rewind to 48 hours before Elena's world shattered. This story is a powerful reminder that your darkest moment can become the doorway to your greatest transformation. No matter how broken you feel right now, no matter how many people have betrayed you, there is always a path forward. And sometimes, the family you discover is far more precious than the one you lost. The warm blood spread against the chilly hospital tile. Elena Carter clutched her pregnant belly, trying to drag herself toward the nurse's station. She knew her nose was broken. She could feel the sharp edge of cartilage, out of place, and the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. Yet, the physical agony was nothing compared to the sheer terror that gripped her heart. Her baby, her child just weeks away from being born, was in grave danger. Standing behind her was Derek Mitchell, his hands still formed into a fist, his breath hissing between his teeth. This was the man she'd married 4 years earlier, the one she had entrusted with her hopes, her dreams, and her very being. He was the man who had just hit her with enough force to send her sprawling onto the floor. Watching from the doorway of the exam room was another woman, Victoria Lawson. She leaned casually against the doorframe, her arms crossed, with a faint smile on her perfectly painted lips. She made no move to get help, nor did she cry out. She just watched, like a researcher observing an experiment that was going exactly according to plan. Elena's hand stretched toward the hallway as her sight began to grow dim. "Please," she managed to whisper, "my baby, someone please help my baby." Victoria's expensive heels made a sharp clicking sound on the tile as she came closer and knelt beside Elena. The heavy scent of her designer perfume mingled with the coppery smell of blood. "Darling," Victoria murmured, in a soft, almost gentle voice, "this was always going to happen. You were never meant to have that baby, or that husband, or any of this." In the distance, alarms started to wail. Elena could hear yelling and the sound of running footsteps, the squeak of sneakers on the polished floor, but none of it registered. All she could focus on was the intense cramping in her stomach, the spreading dampness under her hospital gown, and the horrifying thought that she was losing it all. The very last thing she saw before she lost consciousness was Victoria giving a little wave with her perfectly manicured hand. Just 48 hours before, Elena still had faith in her marriage. She was in her kitchen on that Tuesday morning, making pancakes. Derek was at the breakfast table, his eyes glued to his phone. Their home was lovely, a 4-bedroom colonial house in a peaceful Ohio suburb. Elena had paid the entire down payment herself using money she had diligently saved during her career as a senior financial analyst. Derek's only contribution was his opinion on the wall colors. "Breakfast is done," she announced, placing a plate before him. Derek just grunted, not even bothering to look up. His thumbs were flying across the phone screen, typing a message that brought a smile to his face. Elena rested a hand on her belly. At 8 months pregnant, she felt huge, clumsy, and constantly tired. But she had left her job for this new life. Derek had urged her to concentrate on their family, on getting ready for the baby, on being a stay-at-home mother. She had said yes because she loved him and believed in the life they were creating. "Who are you texting?" she asked, her voice trying for a light, playful tone. "Just work," Derek said, quickly putting the phone in his pocket as he stood up. "I need to get going. I have a big meeting." He gave her a peck on the forehead that felt routine, like he was just checking an item off a list. Elena watched as he grabbed his keys, adjusted his tie in the mirror, and then vanished into the garage, never once looking her in the eye. A heavy silence settled over the house. Elena remained at the table, her gaze fixed on the plate of pancakes that were now getting cold, untouched by Derek. Something felt deeply wrong. She had sensed it for months, a slow, creeping separation between them, a feeling like she was sharing her home with a complete stranger who just happened to look like her husband. But each time she tried to talk about it, Derek would just call her paranoid. "It is the pregnancy hormones," he would say with a wave of his hand. "You are not thinking clearly." Maybe he was right. Perhaps she was just letting her imagination run wild. She tidied up the kitchen, took a shower, and got ready for her lunch with Jessica Palmer. Jessica had been her closest friend since they were college freshmen at Ohio State. They had a friendship built on 10 years of shared confidences, late-night conversations, and solid support through every high and low. If there was anyone who could help Elena make sense of her uneasy feelings, it was Jessica. They decided to meet at their old hangout, a little cafe by the university where they had logged countless hours studying. Jessica was already there in their favorite booth, her blonde hair in a simple ponytail, offering a smile that felt like coming home. "Look at you!" Jessica exclaimed, getting up to give her a hug. "You are absolutely radiant." Elena chuckled and said, "I feel more like a giant beach ball. You look amazing. How's the baby doing?" They ordered their usual salads and fell into easy conversation. They talked about Jessica's job at a marketing agency, Elena's plans for the baby's room, and the latest news about their friends from college. For a brief while, Elena felt a sense of normalcy return. Then Jessica leaned in, her expression full of concern. "But how are you really doing? You sounded so worried on the phone." Elena paused for a moment. Voicing her fears felt risky, as if speaking them aloud would make them undeniably real. "I found a receipt in Derek's coat pocket last week," she admitted quietly. "It was for a bouquet of flowers, but I never got any flowers." For a split second, an unreadable emotion crossed Jessica's face, but her voice was perfectly calm when she replied, "That is odd. Did you bring it up with him?" "He said they were for a coworker whose birthday it was. But Jessica, he is coming home late almost every night. He's always hiding his phone. He hardly even touches me anymore." Elena could feel tears welling up, and she hated how weak and desperate she sounded. "I think he's cheating on me." Jessica reached out and gave her hand a firm squeeze. "Oh, honey, you're just letting your imagination get the best of you. Derek absolutely loves you. He's probably just under a lot of pressure at work. Guys can get weird when a baby is on the way. The responsibility makes them panic." "You really think so?" I am positive, Jessica said with a comforting smile. You two have a perfect marriage. Anyone can see that. Don't let those pregnancy hormones trick you into thinking otherwise. Elena desperately wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that she was just being paranoid, that her husband was still in love with her, and that the foundation of her life was not about to shatter. She had no way of knowing that Jessica had been paid $50,000 to tell her exactly what she wanted to hear. After her lunch, Elena went to Sunrise Memory Care to see her mother. Margaret Reynolds was sitting in her room by the window, her gaze lost on the parking lot outside. At 71, her mind was slowly fading, her memories breaking apart like an old, sun-bleached photograph. On most days, she did not even know who Elena was. "Hi, Mom," Elena said gently, taking a seat next to her. "It is me, Elena." Margaret turned her head slowly. Her white hair was perfectly combed, a testament to the care she received from the staff. She looked at Elena for a long, silent moment without any sign of recognition. But then, something changed in her eyes. "Elena," Margaret whispered, "my dear girl." A wave of joy went through Elena. "You know who I am today." Suddenly, Margaret's hand shot out and grabbed Elena's wrist with a surprising amount of strength. Her eyes were wide and filled with a strange, frightened clarity that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "Your father," Margaret said urgently. "You have to know about your father." Elena went completely still. Her biological father was a complete mystery to her. Margaret had adopted her when she was 3. Right after Elena's birth, Mother died in a car crash. The story she had always been told was simple. Her father was an unknown traveler who left before she was even born. There was nothing else to the story. "Mom," she said very carefully, "what about my father?" Margaret fought to find the right words, her mind battling the thick fog that always tried to pull her under. "William. His name was William. He never knew. Your mother didn't tell him." Elena felt her world spin. "Who is William? What do you mean he never knew? I saved his number," Margaret pressed on, her grip getting tighter. "All these years, just in case you ever needed him, in case something bad happened. Sarah made me promise." Sarah was the name of Elena's birth mother. Elena had seen pictures and heard stories, but she had never actually known her mom. Elena pressed her, asking, "Who is William? Where can I find him?" But Margaret's brief moment of understanding was already vanishing. A nurse came in with medicine, breaking up the conversation with her cheerful, businesslike manner. By the time the nurse left, Margaret was gazing out the window again with a blank look on her face. "Who are you?" Margaret asked when Elena tried to speak again. "Why are you in my room?" Elena drove home, feeling completely stunned. Who could William be? Why did her mother keep him a secret? She wondered what other memories were lost inside Margaret's confused mind, popping up at random, only to fade away again. She decided not to tell Derek about the conversation. It was the first time in their entire marriage that she had kept something from him. That night, she found herself wishing she had kept more secrets. Derek called to say he was working late because of some emergency at the office that needed his full attention. Elena gave him a goodbye kiss and watched his car pull away, feeling a strange sense of worry that she could not quite understand. At 10:30, she was still wide awake and reached for Derek's iPad on the nightstand. They had always shared their passwords and had an open policy about their devices and online accounts. It was something Derek had insisted on. He called it transparency, the very foundation of trust. The screen of the iPad lit up in her hands. She was planning to read an article about pregnancy or look at nursery decorations to take her mind off things, but a text message alert appeared at the sum of the screen. It was from Victoria. "I cannot wait to see you tonight. Wear that blue shirt I got for you." Elena's heart felt like it stopped beating. Her fingers moved on their own, tapping to open the message conversation. She scrolled backward, reading through months of conversation she was never supposed to find. There were intimate photographs, declarations of love, and plans for a future that did not have her in it. The woman named Victoria called Elena awful names, like the whale, the problem, and the paycheck. Derek had replied with laughing emojis, agreeing with her, and adding his own cruel comments about his wife that made Elena feel sick to her stomach. But the most hurtful messages were from just 3 days before. Derek had written, "As soon as the baby is born, I am going to file for divorce and ask for full custody. Elena will have no idea it is coming." Victoria had replied, "Perfect. Then we can sell the house, get the child support money from her, and begin our new life together. She will be left with absolutely nothing." Derek's response was, "She deserves absolutely nothing." The iPad fell from Elena's shaking hands. She had been married to a man she did not even know. She had sacrificed her career, her freedom, and her whole sense of self for someone who was plotting to ruin her, and she had been completely blind to it all. Elena did not get any sleep that night. She just sat in the darkness of her bedroom with her hands on her pregnant belly, trying to figure out how her entire life had fallen apart right before her eyes. 4 years of marriage, 4 years of thinking Derek loved her, 4 years spent creating a future that was nothing but a lie from the very start. By the time morning came, she had made up her mind. She was going to confront Derek calmly and demand that he tell her the truth. She had to protect herself and her unborn child. She would not let him see her fall apart. She did not know that the next 48 hours would shatter her in ways she could never have imagined. The early morning sun created long shadows across the floor of the bedroom. As Elena got dressed, with trembling hands, she repeated what she was going to say in her head 100 times during that long, sleepless night. She had thought about every way the conversation could go and had a plan for each one. She promised herself she would stay calm, be logical, and insist on hearing the truth before deciding what to do next. She was 31 years old, 8 months pregnant, and her whole world had just been exposed as an elaborate deception. Derek had already gone to work by the time she got downstairs. Elena forced herself to eat a piece of toast, knowing her baby needed the nourishment, even though she felt too sick to eat. After that, she got into her car and started the 30-minute drive to Derek's office in downtown Columbus. The building was a tall, modern tower of glass and steel, the headquarters of Mitchell Real Estate Development. Derek held the title of Regional Sales Director, but Elena had just learned from those terrible text messages that the company was having serious money problems, which was another secret he had hidden from her. She parked her car in a visitor spot and walked into the lobby with her head held high. The receptionist knew her right away. "Mrs. Mitchell," the young woman said with a warm smile. "Mr. Mitchell did not say you were stopping by. I wanted it to be a surprise," Elena said. The lie felt bitter in her mouth. She rode the elevator up to the 14th floor, and her heart beat faster with every floor they passed. The elevator doors opened to a carpeted hallway with offices on both sides. In the distance, she could hear the sound of ringing phones and the low hum of salespeople making their calls. Derek's corner office was located at the very end of the hall. The door was open just a little bit. Elena walked toward it slowly, her feet making no sound on the thick carpeting. She could hear voices coming from inside, the sound of laughter, and a woman's voice that was low and flirtatious. She gently pushed the door open. Derek had Victoria pinned against his desk. His shirt was open, and her skirt was pulled up high on her thighs. They were so lost in each other that neither of them saw Elena standing in the doorway until she spoke. "So, it is all true," she said. They jumped apart. Victoria was the first to recover, and her look of surprise quickly turned into one of amusement. She made no effort to fix her clothes. She just smoothed down her skirt and smiled. "Well, look what we have here," Victoria said. The wife finally caught on. Derek was still clumsily trying to button his shirt. His face went from pale to red, flashing through different emotions too fast to read. But when his eyes finally met Elena's, she saw no guilt in them, only irritation. "What are you doing here?" he asked sharply. "You were supposed to be at home." Elena grabbed the door frame to steady herself as her legs suddenly felt very weak. "I am your wife. I am 8 months pregnant with our child, and you are asking me why I am here?" Victoria slid off the desk and walked toward Elena with the confident walk of someone who knows they have already won. She was beautiful in a sharp, calculating way, with dark hair, red lipstick, and eyes that shone with a mix of cleverness and cruelty. "I will handle this baby," Victoria said to Derek over her shoulder. She stood right in front of Elena, so close that Elena could smell her perfume. "Elena, let us act like grown-ups about this. Derek is not in love with you. He never was. You were just convenient, a steady source of income while he got his life in order. But now," she tilted her head, "you are just getting in the way." Elena looked past her at Derek. "Say something. Tell me she is not telling the truth." Derek straightened his tie. His face was now a mask of cold indifference. "She is not lying," he said. "I want a divorce. I have already spoken with a lawyer. You will be hearing from them soon." The words felt like they were hitting Elena. She stumbled backward, and as she did, a sharp pain shot through her stomach. It was a contraction, a real and strong one, and it was happening far too soon. "I am having contractions," she said, struggling to breathe. Victoria rolled her eyes. Such a drama queen. "She is just faking it to get sympathy." Elena clutched her stomach as another wave of pain crashed over her. This was not an act. Something was seriously wrong. The stress, the shock, the betrayal, her body was reacting in the worst possible way. "Derek, please," she whispered. "I have to go to a hospital." "Fine," Derek said, without any concern. "Go to the hospital, but do not think I am coming with you. I have important things to take care of here." He turned his back, her, and faced Victoria, as if his pregnant wife was not standing in the doorway in agony. Victoria wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his cheek, watching Elena over his shoulder with a clear look of victory on her face. Elena stumbled out of the office and somehow managed to get to the elevator. The door shut, and she slid down against the wall, sobbing and holding her phone with fingers that could barely grip it. She called the only person she had left in the world. "Jessica," she managed to say through her tears when her friend picked up. "I need your help. Derek is cheating on me. I am having contractions. I have to get to the hospital." "Oh my God," Jessica said, her voice full of worry. "I am on my way right now. Go directly to Mercy General. I will find you there. Everything is going to be all right, I promise." Elena believed her. That was the very last promise Jessica Palmer would ever be able to keep. Mercy General Hospital stood out against the gray November sky, a massive group of connected buildings that served most of the eastern suburbs of Columbus. Elena somehow drove herself there, gripping the steering wheel tightly through waves of pain that came every few minutes. The emergency room staff saw her right away. Her blood pressure was high, and her contractions were real, though they were not regular yet. The baby was showing signs of stress, but was stable. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, who was Elena's obstetrician, showed up within an hour. She was a calm and capable woman in her mid-40s with some gray in her hair and kind eyes. "Elena," she said in a gentle voice, Your body is under an incredible amount of stress. These contractions are a warning sign. I need you to stay here so we can keep an eye on you. Am I going to lose my baby? We are going to do everything we can to make sure that does not happen, Dr. Morrison said. But you have to rest. You have to stay calm. Whatever happened to you today, you need to push it out of your mind and focus only on yourself and this child. Elena just stared blankly, letting the nurses guide her into a private room. They strapped monitors to her pregnant belly, and the steady beep of her baby's heartbeat filled the silence. That sound was supposed to be a comfort. But now, every single beat was a painful reminder of just how fragile her world had become. 2 hours later, Jessica blew through the door. She was holding a bouquet of flowers with tears already streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, Elena," she cried, rushing over to the bed. "I am so sorry. I had no idea about Derek. He had all of us fooled." Elena collapsed into her friend's arms, her sobs muffled against Jessica's shoulder. "I do not know what to do," she choked out. "He is going to take everything. He is even going to try and take my baby." Jessica gently stroked her hair. "We will fight him," she promised. "I will help you find a lawyer. You still have your savings, right? The account Derek does not know about." Elena nodded, thinking of her secret lifeline. It was $400,000, money she had carefully saved before she ever met Derek. She kept it in a separate account under her maiden name. He had absolutely no clue it existed. It was her escape plan, her insurance policy for a day just like this. "Good," Jessica said. "Text me the account details. I will help you move it somewhere safer before Derek tries to freeze your assets." For a second, Elena hesitated. The request felt a little strange, a little too fast. But this was Jessica, her best friend for 10 years. The same Jessica who held her hair back in college when she was sick. The one who helped her pick out her wedding dress. Jessica had never, not even once, given her a single reason to doubt her. So, Elena typed the information into a message and handed her the phone. Jessica quickly copied the numbers and smiled. "Get some rest now," she said, squeezing Elena's hand. "I will start making some calls. Everything is going to be okay." Jessica slipped out into the hallway, pulling the door almost shut. Elena tried to drift off to sleep. The medication the nurses gave her made her feel heavy and tired, pulling her down into darkness. But something was scratching at the edge of her mind. An instinct she just could not shake. She slowly got up to use the bathroom. The room tilted a bit as she walked to the small toilet. On her way back to bed, she peeked through the narrow window in the door and saw something that made her heart stop cold. Jessica was in the hall, talking to someone. It was not a nurse or a doctor. It was Victoria Lawson, and they were not fighting. They did not look surprised to see each other at all. They were talking like old friends, like partners who had been planning this for a very long time. Victoria handed Jessica a thick envelope. Jessica flipped it open, glanced at what was inside, and gave a satisfied nod. Then Jessica took out her own phone, typed for a moment, and showed the screen to Victoria. Even through the small window, Elena could see Victoria's triumphant smile. Elena could read her lips perfectly. Perfect. That is her account. All 400,000. Derek will be so happy. Elena's legs gave out from under her. She had to grab the wall to keep from collapsing, barely stumbling back to her bed before she fell completely. Silent, racking sobs shook her whole body. She shoved her fist against her mouth, desperate to keep from screaming out loud. Jessica, her best friend, who was like a sister to her, had been working with them this whole time. Just then the door opened, and Jessica walked back in, her face a perfect mask of gentle concern. "You should be sleeping," she said softly. Elena forced her body to go still, to keep her breathing steady. She had to pretend she did not know that the woman by her bed had just destroyed her entire life. I am trying, Elena whispered back. Good. Jessica leaned down and kissed her forehead. Sleep well, sweetie. Everything is going exactly according to plan. Then she was gone. With trembling fingers, Elena grabbed her phone. She opened her banking app, put in her password, and stared at the screen in horror. Account balance, $0.00. A transfer of $400,000 had been made 15 minutes ago. It was all gone. Elena had no husband, no savings, and no best friend. She was 8 months pregnant, trapped in a hospital bed, and completely, utterly alone. She cried into her pillow until she was empty, until there were no tears left to cry. Then she just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how she could possibly survive. She made a decision. In the morning, she would check herself out. She would find a women's shelter. She would start over from nothing. But she had no idea that the worst was still on its way. Night fell over Mercy General Hospital like a dark blanket. Elena just lay in her bed, watching the monitors that tracked her baby's heartbeat. The contractions had eased up. The doctors were cautiously hopeful. If she could just stay calm and rest for the next few days, she had a good chance of carrying the baby to full term. But staying calm felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jessica's smiling face, a smile that hid 10 years of lies, the hand that had squeezed hers while planning her ruin, the casual cruelty of taking everything from her and calling it a plan. A nurse quietly appeared at her door. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband is here. He says you need to sign some urgent insurance paperwork. Elena's blood ran cold. I do not want to see him. The nurse looked uncomfortable. I understand, but he is saying that if you do not sign tonight, your insurance coverage for the delivery will be canceled. Hospital policy requires a family member's signature for the extended monitoring. I do not have any other family. I am so sorry, the nurse said gently. I can stay right outside if you want, but you really need to sign these. Elena shut her eyes. Margaret could not sign anything. Her dementia was too advanced for any court to recognize her signature. There was literally no one else. Fine, she finally said, but please, stay at the nurse's station where you can hear me if I call. Of course. A few minutes later, Derek walked in. He looked different than he had that afternoon at his office. He seemed softer, almost tired. His shoulders were slumped, and his eyes held a look that could have been mistaken for regret. Elena, he started, sitting down in the chair next to her bed. I am so sorry about what happened today. I was cruel. Seeing you in pain, it made me realize how badly I have messed everything up. Elena said nothing. She just watched him, like a mouse watching a snake, waiting for the strike. Can we please talk? Derek went on. Just for a minute. Not in here. The nurses keep coming in. There is a family consultation room just down the hall. It is private. Please, just 5 minutes. Every nerve in Elena's body screamed at her to say no, but she had to get those insurance papers signed. She needed that coverage for the delivery, for her baby, for whatever came next. And the consultation room was just a few steps away. The nurse's station was right there. If anything happened, she could scream. 5 minutes, she said. That is all you get. Derek helped her out of the bed with a gentleness that felt completely fake. They walked slowly down the hall, Elena with one hand pressed to her belly, Derek hovering by her side like he actually cared. To anyone else, they would have looked like a worried husband taking care of his pregnant wife. The consultation room was at the very end of the corridor, past the last patient room and around a corner. It was much more private than Elena had expected, far more isolated than she realized. Derek opened the door and motioned for her to go inside. Victoria was waiting for them, Elena tried to spin around and leave, but Derek's hand clamped down on her arm like a vice. He dragged her into the room and shut the door behind them. The soft click of the lock sounded as loud as a gunshot. "Hello again, Elena," Victoria said with a smirk. "I hear you have had a rough day. You lost your husband, you lost your money, and you lost your best friend." "Let me out of here," Elena demanded, her voice shaking. "I will scream." Victoria just shrugged. "Go ahead. But take a look at this first." She held up her phone. On the screen was a video. Elena recognized herself right away, and she recognized her own bedroom. But the man in the video was a complete stranger, and the things happening were things she had never, ever done. "It is amazing what technology can do these days," Victoria said, as if they were just chatting about the weather. "This is our little insurance policy. If you try to fight us on the divorce, if you try to say Derek cheated on you, this video goes out to everyone. Your family, your job, the entire internet. That is a fake," Elena shot back. "Anyone can see that it is fake." Derek stepped toward her. "It does not matter if it is fake. People believe what they want to believe. And you know what they will believe? That the baby is not even mine." Elena's hand flew to her stomach to protect her child. "The baby is yours, and you know it. Do I?" Derek's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "Victoria showed me things," he snarled. "Messages you sent to other men. Pictures. Those are all lies," Elena cried out. "I never sent anything to anyone. I have been faithful to you for 4 years." Derek grabbed her by the shoulders, his fingers digging into her skin so hard she knew it would bruise. "Shut up!" he yelled in her face. Victoria just laughed. The sound was high and sharp, like a little kid enjoying a puppet show. "Hit her, Derek," Victoria urged him on. "She deserves it. She has been lying to you for years." Elena struggled to get away. "Derek, please. I am pregnant. The baby." His fist smashed into her face. The pain was like nothing Elena had ever felt before. It exploded inside her skull, sending waves of pure agony through her entire body. She felt the crunch of her nose breaking, felt hot blood gush down her face, and then she was falling. She hit the hard floor. Her hands instinctively went to her belly, just as Derek's foot slammed into her side. She let out a scream as his foot connected with her body again. From the side, Victoria just laughed. "Not so perfect now, are you?" she sneered. Then Derek kicked her square in the stomach. Elena felt something inside her tear apart. It was a sickening give, a sudden gush of warmth, and a pain so sharp it felt like a knife was being twisted in her gut. A dark stain started to bloom on her hospital gown, growing far too quickly. It was too much blood. She screamed again and again, each cry more desperate than the last. Finally, a wave of relief washed over her as she heard shouting down the hall. Footsteps pounded closer, and alarms began to blare. The door to her room flew open, and a flood of nurses rushed in. They swarmed her bed, calling out numbers and medical terms that were a blur to her. "She's hemorrhaging," one of them shouted. "The baby's heart rate is dropping. Get an operating room ready now. Call Dr. Morrison and tell her it's an emergency." Hands lifted Elena onto a gurney, and the ceiling tiles streamed by in a dizzying haze. The chaos of more voices, more alarms, and more panic swirled around her. But through it all, her eyes were fixed on Derek and Victoria as they walked calmly towards the door. Victoria even glanced back and gave a little wave. After that, everything faded to black. The phone rang in William Ashford's penthouse office at 11:47 at night, Eastern Time. He was looking over the contracts for his newest development, a massive complex in Manhattan that would add another $100 million to his already huge fortune. Now 63 years old, William had built Ashford Industries from the ground up, turning it into one of the biggest real estate empires on the East Coast. He had started out as a simple carpenter's apprentice in Cleveland. Today, he owned buildings in 12 different states. The incoming call was from an Ohio area code he did not recognize. For some reason, he picked it up. "Hello?" A weak, shaky voice crackled over the line. "William? William, is that you? This is Margaret. Margaret Reynolds." The coffee cup in William's hand stopped just inches from his lips. He hadn't heard that name in 30 years. Margaret Reynolds was his old girlfriend's best friend. This was from a time when he was a nobody, working construction jobs all day and taking business classes at night. It was from a time when he was head over heels in love with a woman named Sarah, who had vanished one day with no explanation at all. "Margaret?" he asked, carefully setting the cup down. "What's going on? Who is Elena?" "She's your daughter, William," the voice said, trembling with a mix of urgency and confusion. "Elena is your daughter. Sarah never told you she was pregnant when she left. I've been raising her ever since Sarah passed away. Please, you have to help her. She's in danger. She's at the hospital." The line went dead. William sat motionless at his desk. His heart was pounding against his ribs as his mind struggled to make sense of the news. His entire understanding of the last 3 decades had just been completely turned upside down. He had a daughter, a 31-year-old daughter he never knew existed. Sarah hadn't just left him. She had left because she was pregnant and was too proud to ask for help from a man who had nothing to give. And now, that daughter was in trouble. William grabbed another phone and buzzed his personal assistant. "Get my jet ready," he ordered. "I'm flying to Ohio tonight, and I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Elena Carter. Her maiden name was Reynolds, and she's in a hospital in Columbus right now." "Yes, sir," his assistant replied, followed by a brief pause. "Is everything okay?" "I don't know," William answered honestly, "but I'm about to find out." 4 hours later, William's private jet landed at a small airport just outside of Columbus. A black sport utility vehicle was waiting for him right on the tarmac. His security team had spent the entire flight digging up information. The report was grim. Elena Carter, age 31, was married to a man named Derek Mitchell, a sales director for a failing real estate company. She was in emergency surgery at Mercy General Hospital after a violent assault. Her husband was a person of interest, and the police were already at the hospital. William hadn't slept a wink. The whole flight, he had just stared out the window into the blackness, thinking of all the moments he had lost. He missed her first steps and her first words. He missed her graduations and all her birthdays. He had missed every single milestone that a father should see as his child grows up. 31 years of a life he should have been a part of were just gone, all because Sarah didn't think he was good enough. He was determined to prove her wrong. The vehicle pulled up to the hospital at 2 in the morning. William brushed past a security guard who tried to stop him and marched into the emergency wing. He moved with the confidence of a man who had controlled boardrooms, closed billion-dollar deals, and never took no for an answer. A nurse stepped in his way. "Sir, only immediate family are allowed back here." "I'm her father," William stated, his voice as solid and unbreakable as stone. "Take me to her right now." Something in his commanding tone made the nurse obey without another word. She guided him down hallways that smelled of antiseptic and fear. They passed rooms where other families were living out their own tragedies until they finally stopped outside the surgical wing. Through a small window in the door, William saw Elena for the very first time. She was lying unconscious on an operating table, looking pale, bruised, and broken. A team of doctors moved around her with practiced speed. Monitors beeped. tracking the rhythm of two heartbeats. One was weak and faint, the other was tiny but fighting hard to survive. William pressed his hand flat against the cold glass. "Come on," he whispered. "You have to fight. I only just found you. Don't you dare leave me now." The surgery dragged on for 2 long hours. William never moved. He didn't eat, and he didn't sit down. He stood at that window like a guard on duty, watching a team of strangers fight to save the daughter he never knew he had. Then, at 4:47 in the morning, a tiny cry cut through the tense silence. It was the baby, a little boy, and he was alive. The surgeon looked over and gave William a thumbs up through the window. At the same time, Elena's heart rate began to steady. The flashing red lights on her monitor turned to a hopeful, stable green. The strength drained out of William, and he slumped against the wall. For the first time in 40 years, the self-made billionaire who had built an empire from nothing finally broke down and cried. Elena slowly drifted back to consciousness, like someone rising from the bottom of a deep, dark pool. The first thing she felt was pain. Her face was throbbing. Her stomach was a mess of aches. And every single breath was a struggle. But underneath all that pain, she felt something else, a strange lightness, a feeling that something was missing, her baby. Elena's eyes shot open. She tried to push herself up, but a pair of gentle hands pressed her back down on her shoulders. "Easy now," a man's voice said. "You've been through quite an ordeal." She blinked, trying to bring the room into focus. It was dim, with soft afternoon sunlight peeking through the blinds. The bed was surrounded by medical machines, all beeping and humming in a steady, reassuring rhythm. In the chair next to her sat a man she had never seen before. He looked to be in his early 60s, with silver hair, a strong chin, and eyes that felt strangely familiar. It was like looking in a mirror that showed a different person from a different time, but with a flicker of something she recognized deep down. "Who are you?" Elena whispered. The man leaned in closer. He had his hands clasped together, and his face was a mix of hope, fear, and a flood of other emotions. "Elena," he said, "my name is William Ashford. I'm your father." The words didn't register. They felt impossible. Elena tried to make them fit into her reality. She struggled to connect his words to anything she knew, but they just felt wrong. "I don't have a father," she managed to say. "Your mother never told me about you," William explained. His voice was calm, but Elena could see the massive effort it took for him to keep it that way. "She left before I ever knew she was pregnant. Margaret was the one who kept her secret all this time. She's the one who called me 2 nights ago. She saved your life." Margaret, the old phone number she had held on to for 30 years. The sudden moment of clarity in the memory care home. "Your father," Margaret had said. "His name was William." Elena began to cry. Everything hurt. Her body, her heart, and the entire story of her life as she knew it. For 31 years, she had believed she was completely alone in the world. She thought her father was just some nameless man who had walked out on her mother before she was even born. And now, this stranger was sitting by her bed, claiming to be the part of her life that had always been missing. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "I know," William said softly. "I know you don't. To be honest, I don't fully understand it all myself. But we have time now. We have all the time in the world to figure this out together." Just then, the door opened, and a nurse came in, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She had a warm, professional smile on her face. "Miss Carter," she said cheerfully, "would you like to hold your son?" Elena gasped. She had been so lost in the pain, so shocked by the incredible news about her father, that she hadn't let herself believe the most important thing of all. Her baby had survived. The nurse gently placed the tiny bundle in Elena's arms. She looked down at his perfect little face, his closed eyes, and his miniature fingers curled into tiny fists. He was absolutely perfect. He was real. He was here with her. Elena cried even harder, but these were not tears of pain. They were tears of pure relief and a gratitude so deep it felt like it could swallow her whole. William watched them, his own eyes filling with tears. This was his family, the family he never knew he had. "What are you going to name him?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Elena looked up at the man who had shown up out of nowhere and saved her. The father she had been looking for her whole life without even realizing it. The grandfather her son was so incredibly lucky to have. "William," she said. "His name is William, after the amazing grandfather he's so lucky to have." At that, William completely lost his composure. The billionaire, the empire builder, the man who had stared down corporate takeovers and market crashes without even a flinch, sobbed openly at his daughter's bedside. "I am never leaving you again," he promised. "Either of you. I will be here for you from now on." Elena's fingers wrapped around his, and for the very first time in her life, she felt what it was like to have a father. In the days that followed, Elena pieced together everything that happened while she was unconscious. The police had arrested Derek and Victoria right there at the hospital, their brutal assault captured in high definition by security cameras. Detective Frank Cooper, a seasoned officer with 3 daughters of his own, took a deep and personal interest in the case. The video evidence was absolutely sickening. It showed Derek's hands, slick with Elena's blood, and Victoria laughing cruelly in the background, while Elena's terrified screams were recorded on the audio. Jessica was taken into custody from her apartment the next morning. She still had the envelope full of cash that Victoria had given her. She desperately tried to claim she was innocent, insisting she had been forced into it. But her own text messages painted a very different picture. They revealed 6 long months of planning with Victoria, detailing every payment and betrayal in stark black and white. The $400,000 was stopped dead in its tracks before it could be wired out of the country. William's team of forensic accountants had traced the money in just a few hours, working with the authorities to make sure every last cent was recovered. But all the legal drama felt like a distant echo to Elena. Her entire world had become the tiny human being who needed her for absolutely everything. Baby William, who the nurses had nicknamed Little Will, had arrived 6 weeks early. He spent his first week of life in the neonatal intensive care unit, hooked up to a network of monitors, feeding tubes, and oxygen. Elena would sit by his incubator for what felt like endless hours each day, talking to him, singing softly, pouring all of her hope into every breath she took, praying he would grow stronger. William Sr. was always by her side. He brought in top specialists. He made certain that little Will was receiving the absolute best care imaginable. He stood watch with Elena, keeping her company through the long, quiet nights, bringing her meals she had no appetite for, and gently reminding her to care for herself just as she was caring for her son. It was during those peaceful hours that they really talked. Elena learned all about her mother, Sarah Reynolds, who had been William's girlfriend for 2 years before she suddenly vanished. She learned that William had spent years searching for her, even hiring private detectives, trying desperately to figure out why she had left him without a single word. "I loved her," William said late one night, his voice thick with a grief that was decades old. "I was going to ask her to marry me. I would have walked away from it all to make a life with her, but she never gave me that chance." "Why do you think she left?" Elena asked. "I cannot be 100% sure, But Margaret told me Sarah had just found out she was pregnant. It happened right when I closed my first major business deal, and suddenly, I was making serious money. My career was taking off, and Sarah, William stopped for a moment. Sarah was incredibly proud. She had a fierce sense of pride. She did not want anyone to even think she was using me for my success. She refused to be seen as a burden, so she just vanished. And when she disappeared, she took my daughter away with her. Elena absorbed this new information slowly, turning it over and over in her thoughts, like a smooth river stone. Her mother had truly loved her, had given up everything to raise her on her own, and had died tragically in a car crash when Elena was only 3 years old, leaving her with Margaret. Margaret never told you, Elena said. The reality of it setting in, all of those years, and she never once tried to contact you. She told me she thought about it countless times, William answered. But your mother made her give her word, and Margaret is someone who always keeps her promises. Elena glanced over at little Will, who was sleeping so peacefully in his incubator. I really wish I could have known her, she said in a near whisper. William gently took her hand. You have so much of her in you, he said. That same determination, that same strength, that same stubborn streak. A small smile broke through his tears. She would be so incredibly proud of you. After 2 long weeks, little Will was finally strong enough to be discharged from the NICU. Elena clutched him tightly in her arms as a nurse pushed her in a wheelchair toward the hospital's main exit, and the simple act of taking her son out into the world brought a rush of emotion that completely overwhelmed her. William was waiting for them by the curb with a private car. He had arranged for Elena and the baby to live at his estate just outside of Cleveland. It was a sprawling mansion that felt a bit excessive, but it was also a fortress, completely safe and secure, far away from anyone who might wish them harm. You really do not have to do all this, Elena said as the car smoothly pulled away from the curb. I know, William said with a warm smile. I want to. She looked over at him, this man who was a stranger, but also her father, and she felt a glimmer of something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The estate was breathtaking in a way Elena had never seen before, with vast, rolling lawns, perfectly tended gardens, and a house that looked like it was pulled from an architecture magazine, all clean lines of stone and glass. But it was not the opulence that struck her. It was the quiet, after weeks filled with the sounds of the hospital, the constant beeping of machines, the hushed voices in the hallways, and the steady drone of equipment. The deep silence felt like a precious gift. A nursery had been fully prepared, with walls painted a soft, pale blue, and a crib that likely cost more than Elena's old car. It was filled with stuffed animals, colorful mobiles, and a rocking chair placed perfectly by the window to soak in the afternoon sun. This is way too much, Elena said, feeling overwhelmed. It is not even close to being enough, William replied. I have 31 years of catching up to do. Over the next few weeks, Elena slowly started to mend. Her body was the first to recover. The ugly bruises began to fade, her surgical scars healed, and the physical reminders of Derek's rage gradually disappeared, replaced by healthy skin. Her mind, however, took much longer. She began sessions with a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Catherine Price, who focused on helping survivors of trauma and domestic violence. They talked through the details of the assault, the sting of Jessica's betrayal, and the many years of quiet manipulation that had led to that one terrible night. Abuse is not always loud and obvious, Dr. Price explained during a session. It can be very subtle, something that builds over time. It can disguise itself as concern or even as love and protection, until one day you wake up and you do not even recognize the person you have become. I kept telling myself it was my fault, Elena admitted, that if I had only been a better wife, he would not have cheated on me, or that if I had just paid closer attention, I could have prevented it. The only one responsible for Derek's actions is Derek, Dr. Price stated with unwavering conviction. You are not responsible for his violence. You are not responsible for his lies. You are not responsible for any part of this. Elena desperately wanted to believe her, and on some days, she was almost there. Little Will grew healthier and stronger with each passing day. He started sleeping all through the night when he was 6 weeks old. He gave his first real smile at 8 weeks. He let out his first laugh at 10 weeks, a sound so pure and full of joy that it made Elena cry every single time she heard it. William Sr.'s was completely transformed by the presence of his grandson. The powerful businessman who ran meetings and closed major deals became a gentle, silly man in the nursery. He would make the most ridiculous faces and sing lullabies completely off-key. He would hold the baby for hours just so Elena could get some rest, whispering promises to him about all the adventures they would have together. I am going to teach you how to fish, William would tell the baby one afternoon, and how to play chess, and how to throw a perfect spiral. All of the things I never had the chance to teach your mother. Elena would watch them from the doorway, her heart feeling full to the point of bursting. She had lost so much, her husband, her life savings, her closest friend, but in their place, she had discovered something she never even realized was missing. A father, a real family, and a new future. And very soon, she was going to get her justice too. On the day Elena finally came face to face with Victoria Lawson, she wore a simple black dress and chose not to wear any makeup to hide her fading bruises. 6 weeks had passed since the attack. Victoria had been denied bail and was being held in jail, considered a flight risk because of her history of committing fraud in other states using different identities. The case against her was airtight, with security videos, text messages, financial documents, and the deepfake video that had been traced directly to her own laptop. She was facing a very long prison sentence, but Elena needed more than what the courts could offer. She needed to look the woman who had tried to ruin her life directly in the eyes and say everything that needed to be said. William had arranged for them to have a private meeting at the detention facility. His legal team had worked out all the details. 5 minutes, alone in an interview room, with guards posted right outside the door. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? William asked her as they drove through the bleak November morning. Yes, Elena answered, her voice firm. I need to have this closure. The detention center was a flat, grim-looking building surrounded by high chain-link fences topped with razor wire. Elena walked through the metal detectors and past the security checkpoints with her head held high. The guards there treated her with a surprising amount of compassion. They had seen the video. They knew exactly what Victoria had done. The interview room was small and cold, furnished with only a metal table, 2 chairs, and a camera on the wall to record their entire conversation. Victoria was already in the room, waiting for her, when Elena walked in. She looked much different in the bright orange jumpsuit, almost smaller. The fancy designer outfits and flawless makeup were gone, swapped for prison clothes and a bare face. But her eyes had not changed at all. They were just as cold, calculating, and completely without remorse. Did you come here to gloat? Victoria asked with a sneer. How very predictable. Elena sat down in the chair across from her. The metal table between them did not feel like nearly enough of a barrier, but she knew the guards were just outside. Victoria could not lay a hand on her ever again. I need you to understand something, Elena began, her voice perfectly steady. She had rehearsed this speech in her mind 100 times. You spent 18 months of your life scheming to destroy me, 18 months manipulating my husband, buying off my best friend, and plotting to steal my child and my inheritance. Victoria just smirked, and I came so close to succeeding. Almost, Elena agreed, leaning forward just a little. But there is one thing you never bothered to consider. You were so busy obsessing over what I might inherit that you completely forgot about who I actually am. I am a financial analyst. I have spent years of my life finding patterns of fraud in corporate finances. Did you honestly believe I would not notice all the little things? It was how Jessica suddenly sported new jewelry and how Derek's excuses never quite made sense. I sensed something was deeply wrong, but I never imagined the truth. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Victoria's smug face. But that is not why I came here, Elena said calmly. I am here to make sure you understand exactly what you are losing. It is not just your freedom, though you will have a long time to reflect on that. It is everything else. Elena let her words hang in the air. You know Derek never loved you, do not you? He used you in the same way you were using him. The only difference is you actually developed feelings for him. I saw how you looked at him in those text messages. You imagined he would be all yours once I was out of the picture, but Derek is only loyal to his addictions. Shut your mouth, Victoria hissed. That money you were so desperate to get your hands on, my father is worth $4 billion. That is $4 billion. The $400,000 you and Jessica managed to steal is just pocket money to him. And we have already gotten it all back. Jessica is already in custody. Everything you schemed for, every plan you made, every single thing you gave up, it was all for nothing. Victoria's composure was finally beginning to crumble. Her jaw was tight, and her hands were balled into fists on the table. And do you know what the worst part is? Elena asked. The one thing that is going to eat you alive every single day in that prison cell. She rose to her feet. I am going to forget all about you. In a year, you will not even cross my mind. I will be busy raising my son in a home that is filled with love. I will be building a relationship with the father I never knew I had. My life will be so beautiful that your 18 months of plotting will be nothing more than a bad memory. You tried to take my whole world from me, but instead, you gave me a new one. If you had not forced Derek to reveal who he truly was, I might have stayed in that miserable marriage for another 20 years. So, I should thank you, Victoria. Thank you for giving me my freedom. Elena turned and walked away toward the door. Behind her, Victoria completely lost control. She screamed a string of curses. She slammed her fist down on the table. She struggled so violently in her chair that guards had to rush in and hold her down. But Elena never looked back. She stepped out of the detention center into the pale November daylight and felt a sensation she had not experienced in months. She felt free. 2 days after that, she went to see Jessica. This meeting was more difficult to set up. Jessica had been cooperating with the police and had given testimony against Victoria for a lighter sentence, but she had also specifically asked to see Elena, to try and explain herself, to apologize. William told her it was a bad idea. Dr. Price said she was not emotionally ready, but Elena felt it was something she had to do. They met in the exact same interview room under the same harsh fluorescent lights. Jessica looked far worse than Victoria had. Her hair was greasy, her face was gaunt, and her eyes were puffy and red from what looked like non-stop crying. Elena, she began, her voice trembling, I am just so sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen. Yes, you did, Elena replied, her voice empty of emotion. You wanted every single bit of it. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending you did not. At that, Jessica completely fell apart. I was jealous of you. I have always been so jealous. You had the perfect career, the husband, the baby coming, Everything just seemed so easy for you. Easy? Elena felt a hot, sharp anger surge inside her. You thought my life was easy? I abandoned my career for a man who was cheating on me. I was completely isolated and manipulated. He made me feel like I was worthless. And you, my supposed best friend, you watched it all happen and decided to help them ruin me. Victoria offered me $150,000, Jessica whispered. I have student loans, credit card debt. I felt like I was drowning. Do not, do not you dare make this about money. You had countless opportunities to tell me what was going on. Every single time we had lunch, every phone call we had, you made the choice to lie. You chose to betray me, and you seemed to enjoy it. Jessica could not offer a reply. The tears continued to stream down her face. But Elena felt nothing for her. I truly hope the money was worth it, Jessica, because you did not just lose a friend. You lost your entire life. And you will have years in prison to think about that. Elena left without another word. She could hear Jessica's sobs echoing down the hall, but she felt no guilt. She only felt free. The trial took place 3 months later. By that time, little Will was 4 months old and happy. He had his father's dark hair, but thankfully, his mother's eyes. Every time Elena held him, he would flash a sweet smile. She no longer saw Derek in his face. He was her son, and William Sr.'s grandson. Together, they were a family created from the wreckage of deceit. On the day of the sentencing, the courtroom was overflowing with people. Journalists crammed into the gallery, while supporters for the victims took their seats in the first row. Detective Cooper, the officer on the case since its inception, stood in the back, watching with a calm sense of accomplishment. Derek Mitchell was just a shell of the man Elena had once called her husband. Incarceration had worn him down. His gambling debts had followed him inside, and threats from other prisoners had left him looking thin and haunted. The magnetic smile was gone. The confident attitude had disappeared. All the things that once made him appear so strong had been completely taken from him. The official charges were read out loud, starting with aggravated assault against a pregnant woman, followed by attempted murder because of how severe Elena's injuries were, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. With each new charge, Elena felt a heavy burden being removed. Then, it was her moment. She walked confidently to the podium and looked directly at the judge. Her hands were perfectly still, and her voice was strong and clear. Your Honor, she said, the defendant should have been my partner, my protector, and the father of my child. Instead, he assaulted me when I was 8 months pregnant. He kicked me in my stomach in an attempt to murder our unborn son. He actually laughed while his mistress cheered him on. She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to fill the room. I am not asking this court for revenge. I am asking for justice. I demand that Derek Mitchell never gets the chance to do to someone else what he did to me. I want my son to be raised in a world where men like him have to answer for their actions. And I ask that when Derek is sitting in his cell for the next 20 years, he remembers that he once had a family. He had a wife that loved him. He had a son that would have admired him, and he threw it all away for a woman who was just using him. She went back to her seat next to William. The verdicts came quickly, guilty on every single charge. The sentences were deeply satisfying. Derek Mitchell was given 23 years in federal prison, with no chance of parole for at least 18 years. Victoria Lawson got 18 years for conspiracy, fraud, and for being an accessory to attempted murder. Jessica Palmer was sentenced to 5 years for theft and conspiracy. As they led Derek away in handcuffs, he looked back at Elena one last time. Elena, he pleaded, please, I am sorry. She did not even look at him. She simply turned to her father, who wrapped his arm around her. "It is finally over," William said. "Yes," Elena answered. "It is." About 6 months after the trial ended, Margaret Reynolds' health took a serious decline. Elena had made sure to visit her every week since she had gotten out of the hospital. On some days, Margaret knew who she was, and on other days, she did not. But even on the difficult days, Elena would sit by her bed, hold her hand, and tell her all about little Will's newest achievements. "He is crawling everywhere now," Elena said on one of her visits. "He gets into absolutely everything. Your house would have been total chaos." Margaret had offered a weak smile, not really understanding, but finding comfort in the sound of Elena's voice. But the dementia was unforgiving. It chipped away more of Margaret with every month that passed. The staff at Sunrise Memory Care called Elena on a Thursday morning to let her know that the end was probably near. She and William drove to the facility together. The sky was a dull gray, threatening snow. Little Will stayed at home with the nanny that William had hired, where he was safe and warm, completely unaware of the sadness that was on its way. Margaret's room was very quiet. The machines had all been turned off. All medical treatments had been stopped. There was nothing more to do but wait. Elena sat on one side of the bed, and William sat on the other. They each held one of Margaret's hands and listened to her breathing, as each breath became softer than the one before. "Thank you," William said quietly, "for everything. For raising my daughter when I was not able to. For holding on to my number for all those years, and for making that call." For a brief second, Margaret's eyes fluttered. In a moment of impossible clarity, she seemed to recognize him. "William," she whispered, "you came." "I came," he said, "all because of you." Margaret's eyes then moved to Elena. "My sweet girl, I am so sorry I kept secrets from you." Elena leaned in closer, tears running down her cheeks. "You saved my life, Mom. You are always my protector." "There is absolutely nothing to forgive." Margaret looked back and forth between them, a father and daughter, who were finally together after 31 years. "Family," she whispered, and then her eyes closed for the last time. Elena cried. William cried. They held hands over Margaret's body, two people who had been strangers, now connected by the woman who had loved them both so much. The funeral was a small, private affair. Elena had not known many of Margaret's friends. The dementia had cut her off from the world in her final years, separating her from a community she had once belonged to. But the people who did attend spoke with great affection about the woman they recalled. A kindergarten teacher for 30 years, a person who volunteered at the food bank every Thanksgiving, and a guardian who had taken in a 3-year-old orphan and raised the child as if she were her own. Little Will was there, in Elena's arms, too young to know what was happening, but there with his family. He was a continuation of Margaret's legacy, just like Elena, representing a new generation of the family Margaret had fought so hard to keep safe. At the service, William delivered the eulogy. He explained that Margaret Reynolds was not a famous woman. She did not create corporations or change the world in a way that generates headlines, but her contribution was far more significant. For 30 years, she honored a promise. She protected a secret that was not hers to share simply because she had given a friend her word. And when the critical moment came, she summoned the bravery to break that promise. Because staying silent would have meant watching her own daughter perish. He paused, his voice heavy with emotion. "I was never able to thank her the right way. I never had the chance to tell her what her phone call truly meant to me. But I can pay tribute to her memory by being the kind of father Elena deserves, by being the grandfather little Will needs, and by holding together the family that Margaret worked tirelessly to build." After the service concluded, Elena stood alone beside Margaret's grave. The headstone was understated, reading Margaret Ann Reynolds, beloved mother and guardian. She kept families together. Thank you for everything, Mom, Elena whispered, for saving his number, for making that call, for giving me a family when I had absolutely nothing. She set flowers down on the fresh soil and stood quietly as snow began to drift down. William found her there an hour later, trembling in the chill, but unwilling to go. She is finally at peace, he said softly. I know, Elena answered as she wiped her eyes. I just miss her. You always will, William said, putting an arm around her. That is what love does. It remains with us even when the people are no longer here. They walked back to the car in unison, leaving Margaret to her rest. In the months that came after, Elena started to construct a new life. She moved from William's large estate into a place of her own, a cozy house in a quiet part of town where little Will could grow up feeling secure and cherished. William objected at first. He wanted her to stay close, wanting to make up for all the lost time and be a part of every single milestone. But Elena needed her own independence. She had to know she could support herself before she could genuinely accept his help. I am not going anywhere, she promised him. I will bring little Will over every weekend. You can come by whenever you like, but I have to prove to myself that I am capable of doing this. William was understanding. He had created his own empire from scratch. He understood the importance of self-reliance. Elena went back to work, not for her old company, but as a consultant at a nonprofit that assisted survivors of domestic abuse with their financial planning. The job was fulfilling in a way her previous career had never been. She helped women see what their options were, and she taught them how to put money aside from their abusive partners. She helped them create plans for their escape. Every successful outcome felt like a personal victory. Little Will had his first birthday party on a bright May afternoon. William's estate had been completely transformed with balloons and festive streamers. Elena invited her colleagues from the nonprofit, her new neighbors, and a couple of the survivors she had helped who had since become her friends. She stood in the garden and watched her son toddle across the lawn, chasing after bubbles another child was blowing. He stumbled and fell, but he got right back up and kept going, his determination clear in every wobbly step. He is going to become an extraordinary person, William commented, appearing at her side. He already is. William passed her a glass of champagne. To family. Elena touched her glass to his. To family. They observed little Will together, a grandfather and a mother, connected by the child who stood for everything. They had been on the verge of losing. Do you ever feel regret about not knowing me sooner? Elena inquired. William thought about the question for a moment. Every single day, he confessed. I think about every moment I was not there for. Your first steps, your graduation, your wedding, even though that marriage was a terrible mistake. I can never get those years back, and that loss is something that will always sting. He took a breath, but I do not see the point in wasting energy on regret. I found you at the exact moment you needed me most, and now, every single day I have with you, and this little one is a gift I never imagined I would receive. Elena rested her head on his shoulder. My whole life I felt like I never belonged anywhere, she confessed, like I was waiting for something but did not know what it was. Now I know. I was waiting for you. This is where you belong, William replied. You and little Will. This will be your home for as long as you want. The sun started its descent, coloring the sky in hues of gold and rose. Little Will came running toward them with his arms open wide, laughing with absolute delight. Elena scooped him up and lifted him high into the air. Happy birthday, my sweet, perfect boy, she whispered into his hair. For the very first time in her life, Everything felt completely right. The notification popped up on Elena's phone on a completely normal Tuesday morning. She was in her kitchen, fixing breakfast, scrambling some eggs, while little Will hammered a wooden spoon on the tray of his high chair. Sunlight poured through the windows, and coffee was brewing on the counter. Everything felt ordinary. Everything was calm. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, assuming it was a text from William or a reminder for an appointment that afternoon. Instead, she saw a news headline. Derek Mitchell was found dead in his prison cell from an apparent suicide. Elena stood there frozen, the spatula still in her hand. She read the headline over and over. The words did not change. Derek was gone. The man who had assaulted her, the man who had kicked her when she was pregnant, the man who had attempted to ruin her and her child. He no longer existed. Elena waited for a feeling to surface, perhaps relief or satisfaction, maybe even sorrow for the man she once cared for, anything at all. But there was only emptiness, just a silent recognition that a particular chapter of her life was now definitively and completely over. She switched off the stove, lifted little Will out of his high chair, and dialed her father. "I just saw the news," William said the moment he picked up. "Are you okay?" "I think I am," Elena answered. "I thought I would feel something, relief. Maybe anger, just something, but I do not. That is all right. You are not required to feel anything." "He dedicated his whole life to being important," Elena said after a moment, "to being powerful, to controlling every person around him, and in the end, his death is just a notification on my phone that I am about to delete." She stared at the device in her hand. "Is that wrong of me?" she asked, "to not feel a thing?" "No," William's voice was soothing. "It means he no longer has any power over you. It means that you are free." Elena Ocean deleted the notification. She went back to making breakfast. She served little Will his eggs and toast. She tidied up the kitchen, started a load of laundry, and continued with her day as if nothing had changed. Because for her, nothing had. Derek Mitchell was already gone in her mind. He had been gone from the moment he had first struck her in the face. The official news was simply a late confirmation. That night, after little Will was sound asleep, Elena poured a glass of wine for herself and sat on her back porch, watching the stars appear one by one. She thought about the person she was 2 years ago, the woman who had sacrificed her own career for a man who had never truly loved her. The woman who had confided her deepest secrets to her best friend. The woman who had been led to believe that love required sacrifice, that marriage was about submission, and that being a good person was all it took to find happiness. That woman no longer existed. In her place stood someone much stronger, a person who had weathered the unthinkable, someone who had built a brand new life from the ruins of betrayal and had come out more resilient than ever before. Elena lifted her glass toward the dark night sky. "To the woman I used to be," she said quietly, "and to the woman I have now become." She took a long sip and felt the warmth of the wine. Tomorrow, she planned to visit Margaret's grave. She would tell her mother that Derek had died, even though Margaret would not be able to hear. She would bring flowers and spend an hour in quiet conversation, just as she did every single week. The next day, she would take little Will to see his grandfather. They would enjoy lunch together in the garden. William would make silly faces to get the baby to laugh. Elena would roll her eyes and act annoyed, all while feeling her heart expand with love. The day after that, she would return to work. She would help another woman find her way out of an abusive situation. She would apply her own story to help lead someone else toward their own freedom. She would create purpose from her own pain. and her life would move on, not without its flaws, not without challenges, but always progressing, always moving forward. Elena drank the last of her wine and went back inside. She looked in on little Will, gently brushing his hair from his forehead, amazed by the sheer miracle of his life. "Good night, my perfect boy," she whispered. "Mommy loves you so much." She got into her own bed and was asleep in moments, with no nightmares and no startling awake. Just peaceful slumber and the quiet certainty that she was in the exact right place in her life. The morning of little Will's second birthday arrived bright and cloudless. Elena woke up early, even before her alarm went off, filled with a sense of energy that was a pleasant surprise. It had been 2 years since the worst day of her life, 2 years since the assault that almost ended her life and her son's, 2 years since she discovered the truth about Derek, Victoria, and Jessica. 2 years of healing. She showered, got dressed, and started making breakfast while little Will was still asleep. The house was silent besides the sound of birds chirping outside her window and the low hum of the refrigerator. Peace had become her new normal. Safety was now an expectation. The state of constant alert from her marriage had faded away, replaced by a sense of calm she had never known was achievable. When little Will awoke, she brought him downstairs and placed him in his high chair. "Happy birthday, sweet boy," she said, kissing the top of his head. "You are 2 years old today." He gave her a huge smile, showing off all of his baby teeth. "2," he announced with immense pride. He had started talking months ago, forming simple words and phrases that still filled Elena with a sense of wonder. His birthday party was scheduled for that afternoon at William's huge house. Elena had invited the same group of people as the year before. There were colleagues, neighbors, and fellow survivors. The new community she had carefully built after losing everything she once had. But before they could celebrate, she had an important visit to make. She buckled little Will securely into his car seat and drove to the cemetery. Margaret's grave was perfectly kept. Elena had arranged for a service to keep the grass neatly trimmed and the flowers always fresh. It felt like the very least she could offer the woman who had given her a second chance at life. She lifted little Will out of the car and walked him over to the headstone. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. "I brought someone I want you to meet." Little Will wriggled in her arms, completely captivated by a butterfly drifting by. "He is 2 today," Elena went on. 2 whole years old. He is already walking and talking and getting into absolutely everything. You would adore him. She settled onto the grass next to the gravestone, placing little Will comfortably in her lap. "Derek died," she said quietly. "I have a feeling you already know that. The strange thing is, I do not feel anything about his passing. Is that wrong? You were the one who always told me to embrace my feelings and never hide them. But when I got the news, he was gone. There was just a void. I was not angry, and I was not happy. I just felt nothing." She paused for a moment, watching the butterfly as it danced over the flowers. "William is just wonderful. He spoils little Will rotten, but I cannot bring myself to stop him. He missed out on so many years. I think he is trying to cram a lifetime of grandfatherly love into every single day." Little Will grabbed a small clump of grass and presented it to Elena with a triumphant grin. "Thank you, sweetheart," she laughed. "It is beautiful." She looked back at the headstone. "I am doing great, Mom. I am doing really, really well. I honestly never imagined I would be able to say that after everything that happened. I thought I was shattered for good, but I am not. I am even stronger now than I was before, and I have you to thank for that." Getting to her feet, she brushed the grass clippings off her pants. "I love you, Mom. I will love you forever. Thank you for saving my life." She carried little Will back to the car and headed toward William's estate. The party was exactly the joyful escape she needed. William had gone all out with the decorations. There were balloons of every imaginable color, a huge bounce house set up on the lawn, and even a petting zoo with little ponies and baby goats that made little Will squeal with pure joy. "You are spoiling him," Elena teased, as William handed her a glass of champagne. "That is my job as a grandfather," William answered, completely unapologetic. She stood watching her son as he happily chased a baby goat across the lawn, his laughter echoing through the air like a beautiful song. "I never believed I could have this," she said softly. "A family. A true family. When I was growing up, it was always just me and Margaret. I figured that was all I was ever going to have. And then Derek came along, and I was so sure I had found my soulmate, my partner for the rest of my life. But it was all built on lies." She turned her gaze to William. "And then you appeared out of the blue, this father I never knew I had, and all of a sudden, my family was bigger than I ever dreamed." William's eyes glistened with tears. "I wish I had known about you sooner. I wish your mother had just told me." "I know," she replied, "but maybe things happened this way for a reason. Maybe I had to endure all of that pain to become the woman I am today, to truly appreciate everything I have now." "Or maybe," William suggested in a gentle voice, "sometimes awful things simply happen to very good people. And there is no deeper meaning to search for. There is only survival. And you, Elena, survived." She thought about his words for a moment. "I like your way of looking at it better," she confessed. "It feels less overwhelming than trying to find a lesson inside all that trauma." "You do not need to find a lesson," he said. "You just need to keep on living." Just then, little Will came running up to them, his face covered in frosting from a cupcake that someone had given him. "Mama," he yelled. "Pop, Pop, look!" He held up a little handful of dandelions. They were crushed and wilted, but he offered them with such incredible pride. Elena knelt and accepted his gift with over-the-top excitement. "They are absolutely beautiful," she said. "They are the most beautiful flowers I have ever laid eyes on." Little Will beamed with happiness. William scooped him up into a big hug and spun him around and around until they were both laughing and dizzy. Elena watched them, her heart feeling so full it almost hurt. This was her family. It was imperfect and completely unexpected, and it was more valuable than anything she had ever known. This was her life now, and it was a good one. 3 years after the attack, Elena was standing at a podium. She was in a conference room packed with domestic violence advocates, members of law enforcement, and other survivors. She was the keynote speaker for the yearly summit for survivors of intimate partner violence. It was an honor she had never expected, a stage she never thought she would command. "Thank you for inviting me," she started, her voice confident and strong. "I am going to share my story with you, not because my story is unique, but precisely because it is not. Every single person in this room knows someone who has gone through something just like it. Silence is what allows abuse to thrive, and I have chosen to be silent no longer." She told them her entire story, from the slow chipping away of her freedom during her marriage to the constant gaslighting that made her question her own mind. She spoke of the affair she had long suspected but was too afraid to confront, the devastating betrayal by her best friend, the violent assault that nearly ended her life and the life of her unborn son, and the incredible story of the father who came out of nowhere to rescue her. "People often think that surviving abuse is a matter of physical strength," she explained. "It is not. It is about utterly refusing to believe the story your abuser wrote for you. It is about remembering the person you were before they tried to break you down. It is about the courage to build an entirely new life from the ashes of your old one." She paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. "I was lucky. I had a support system that many survivors do not have. I had a father with financial resources who showed up at the perfect time. I had access to medical care and legal help and therapy. Not everyone gets those things. That is why the work all of you do is so vital. That is why organizations like this one are so important. She gripped the sides of the podium for emphasis. But I need you all to understand one thing. Even with all of those advantages, I still had to do the hardest work on my own. I still had to force myself to look in the mirror each morning and choose to believe that I was worth saving. I still had to battle the voice inside my own head that whispered the abuse was all my fault. I still had to rebuild my sense of self from scratch after it had been systematically torn apart for years. The room was completely silent, everyone captivated by her words. That is the true challenge of survival, Elena continued. It is not just about getting away from the abuser, and it is not just about staying safe. It is about reclaiming the person you were always meant to become, and that is a job that nobody else can do for you. You have to do it for yourself, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one single moment of courage at a time. She took a step back from the podium. I am living proof that it is possible, and so is every single survivor sitting in this room. Thank you. The applause that followed was deafening. After her speech, a young woman approached Elena in the lobby. She looked to be about 25 years old, with dark circles under her eyes and a hunched posture, as if she were trying to make herself invisible. Mrs. Ashford? She began hesitantly. I mean, Mrs. Carter. I am not sure what I should call you, Elena offered a gentle smile. Elena is fine. The young woman swallowed nervously. I just wanted to tell you that your speech, it really meant a lot to me. I am in a situation, a really bad one, and I just do not know how to get out. Elena instantly recognized the fear in her eyes, the shame, and the desperate glimmer of hope that someone, anyone, would understand. What is your name? She asked kindly. Sarah. The name hit Elena like a physical shock. It was her mother's name, the woman who had simply disappeared instead of asking for help. Sarah? Elena said, with firm resolve, you are going to get out. I am going to help you. But the first thing I need you to understand is this. Whatever you are experiencing right now, it is not your fault. Do you hear me? It is not your fault. Tears began to well up in Sarah's eyes. I just keep thinking that if I were better, or if I'd just tried a little harder. No, Elena interrupted, taking the young woman's hands in her own. That is what he wants you to think. That is how this kind of abuse works. It convinces you that you are the problem, but the problem is him. It has always been him, and you deserve so much better. They sat and talked for a full hour. Elena gave Sarah her personal phone number and the address of a local safe house. She promised she would check in. She promised she would help, and she was true to her word. 6 months later, Sarah was free. She had left her abuser, all with Elena's support. She was staying in a shelter. While she worked to save money for an apartment of her own, she was also going to therapy. She was carefully rebuilding her life, one step at a time. You saved me, Sarah told Elena during a coffee meeting one afternoon. No, Elena corrected her gently. You saved yourself. I only helped you find the exit. Sarah shook her head in disagreement. I never could have done it if it was not for you. Yes, you could have, and you would have. It might have taken you longer, and it might have been even harder, but you have a strength inside you that you have not even discovered yet. And someday you will use that strength to help somebody else. That is how this all works. That is how we finally break this terrible cycle. Sarah was crying now, but they were quiet tears of pure gratitude and relief. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for truly seeing me when I could not even see myself. Elena wrapped her in a tight hug. You are going to be okay, she said. Actually, you are going to be better than okay. You are going to be amazing. And Elena believed it with all her heart. She understood this because she had experienced it firsthand. 5 years after the absolute worst day of her life, Elena Carter was standing in her garden, watching her little boy play. Will was not so little anymore. At 5 years old, he was already tall, with his mother's eyes and a laugh that sounded just like his grandfather's. He was darting across the lawn, chasing butterflies, his sneakers making soft, squishing sounds in the damp morning grass. "Mama!" he shouted. "Come look at this!" Elena put her coffee mug down and walked over to him. "What did you find, sweetie?" He pointed to a small caterpillar slowly crawling up the stem of a flower. "It is so fuzzy. Can I keep him?" "No, honey. Caterpillars need to stay outdoors so they can become butterflies." "But what if he does not want to be a butterfly? What if he wants to be a caterpillar forever?" Elena kneeled down beside him, giving his question the serious thought it required. "I think," she began carefully, "that becoming a butterfly is the very thing a caterpillar is made to do. It is not always simple, though. They have to wrap themselves in a cocoon and completely change. That is probably a little scary, but afterward, they emerge and get to fly." Little Will nodded, thinking it over, like when you had to change. "Pop told me you went through a really hard time to become the person you are now." Elena's breath hitched in her chest. So William had told him a version of the story, one tailored for a child, but still holding the essential truth. "Yes," she managed to say. "Exactly like when I changed. Are you happy that you became a butterfly?" She gazed at her son, at his sincere expression and his questioning eyes. He was the miracle that had cost her everything, yet given her everything back and more. "Yes," she confirmed, "I am very, very happy." He beamed and turned his focus back to the caterpillar. "I think he wants to stay right on this flower. Then that is what we will let him do." They watched the tiny creature together for a while, until Elena's phone buzzed. It was a text from William. "On my way. See you in 20 minutes. Pop is coming," she announced to little Will. "We should probably get ready." "Is he bringing presents?" Elena laughed. "He always brings presents." They went inside the house to clean themselves up. Elena helped little Will wash his hands and swap his muddy sneakers for clean ones. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, seeing a woman she almost did not recognize from 5 years prior. The bruises had healed long ago. The trauma had softened over time. It had not vanished, but it had become woven into the fabric of her story instead of defining it. She had constructed a life she had never dreamed was possible, with a career dedicated to helping others, a home overflowing with love, and a family that included 3 generations. She was 36 years old. She was the founder of a nonprofit that had aided over 200 women in escaping abusive relationships. She was a mother, a daughter, and a survivor, and she was truly happy. Just then the doorbell rang. Little Will scrambled to be the one to answer it. He flung the door open, revealing William on the porch, his arms piled high with colorfully wrapped presents. Pop, little Will squealed, jumping straight into his grandfather's arms. William scooped him up effortlessly, hoisting him high up into the air. "There's my favorite guy in the world. Are you ready for some gifts?" "Always." They all went into the living room, where little Will immediately began tearing into the wrapping paper with wild excitement. William had brought him toys, a few new books, and a brand new bicycle that would need to be assembled. "You are spoiling him rotten," Elena remarked, saying the same thing she did during every one of his visits. "That is what grandfathers are for," William answered, giving his standard reply. She just laughed and let it be. Some arguments were not worth having. Later on, while little Will was busy with his new toys, Elena and William sat together on the back porch, each with a glass of wine. Do you happen to remember what you said to me that first day I was in the hospital? Elena asked. I said quite a few things on that day. Which one are you remembering? The part where you said you would never leave, that you were there for me forever. William nodded slowly. I remember that. I did not believe you at the time, Elena confessed. I just assumed you were saying what you thought I needed to hear. I had been left behind so many times before, by my mother, even though I know she had her reasons, by Derek, and by Jessica. I truly did not think anyone would ever actually stay, but I did stay. You really did. William reached across the small table and took her hand in his. I know that I can never make up for 31 years of absence. I am painfully aware of how much I missed, but I want you to understand that these past 5 years have been the very best of my entire life. Getting to be your father and his grandfather, it has given me a purpose I never realized I was lacking. Elena squeezed his hand back. I had this idea of what family was supposed to mean. Marriage, a shared past, a sense of duty. But that is not it at all, is it? No, William agreed. Family is about who shows up for you. Family is about who stays no matter what. Family is the people who choose you, especially when they do not have to. They sat together in a peaceful silence, watching as the sun started its slow descent toward the horizon. I used to carry so much anger, Elena said after a while. At Derek, at Victoria, at Jessica, I was even angry at the universe for allowing it all to happen. But I am not angry these days. Now, I just feel grateful. Is that strange? Not strange in the slightest, William replied in a gentle tone. Anger consumes a lot of energy. You have much more important things to focus that energy on now. Just then, little Will came running out to the porch, gripping his new toy truck tightly. Look, Mama, it has lights. He pushed a small button, and the truck's headlights flashed on and off. That is amazing, sweetie, Elena said with real excitement in her voice. Go show Pop Pop. Little Will clambered into William's lap and proceeded to demonstrate every single feature of the new truck, explaining each one with the solemn confidence that only a 5-year-old expert can have. Elena watched the two of them, grandfather and grandson, connected by blood and love, and by the absolute miracle of having found each other against all odds. This was her true family, not the one she was born into, nor the one she had tried so hard to build with Derek. This was something entirely different, something far more resilient. It was a family forged in the fire of betrayal and bound together by deliberate choice. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, streaking the sky with hues of gold and pink. Little Will's detailed explanations trailed off into sleepy mumbling. William held him tenderly, his gaze finding Elena's over the top of the boy's head. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For letting me be a part of this, for giving me a second chance that I know I did not deserve. You absolutely deserved it, Elena answered. You just did not know it at the time. She rose to her feet and gently lifted little Will from William's lap. It is bedtime for this little one. I should get going as well, William said. I have an early meeting tomorrow. They walked to the front door, side by side. Elena adjusted little Will so he was resting comfortably on her hip, and she used her free arm to give her father a warm embrace. Same time again next week? She asked. I would not miss it. He placed a kiss on her forehead and then another on little Will's before walking to his car. Elena stood and watched him drive off down the street, then carried her sleepy son up the stairs to his room. She carefully tucked him into his bed, pulling the covers up over his small frame. He was already drifting off, his eyelids fluttering closed. I love you, she whispered softly. Love you too, Mama, he mumbled back. She flipped off the light and lingered in the doorway for a second, listening as his breathing settled into the slow, steady rhythm of deep sleep. Then she made her way back downstairs. The house was still and quiet. The dishes from their meal were waiting in the sink. Toys were strewn across the living room carpet. Tomorrow would be filled with work, meetings, and all the usual duties of her life. But tonight, there was a profound sense of peace. Elena poured herself just one more glass of wine and carried it out onto the back porch. The first stars were beginning to appear, tiny points of light popping into view against the deepening twilight. Her thoughts drifted to Margaret, resting in peace in the cemetery on the other side of town. She thought of Sarah, her birth mother, who had shown her love by vanishing, believing she would only be a burden. She thought of William, a man who had constructed a corporate empire, but only discovered true meaning when he found the daughter he never knew existed. She thought of Derek, who had taken his own life inside a prison cell, ultimately destroyed by the personal demons he refused to confront. She thought of Victoria, who was still paying her debt to society, with nothing to show for all her scheming. She thought of Jessica, who had been released 2 years prior and was now a receptionist somewhere down in Florida, her future forever limited by mistakes she could never erase. And then she thought about herself, Elena Carter. She was a survivor, a mother, and a daughter, but tonight she felt like she could fly. Elena lifted her wine glass to the quiet night sky. "This is for everyone who helped me up," she whispered, "and for everyone who tried to keep me down. You all made me strong." She took a long, slow sip of the rich wine. The warmth spread through her as she stood in the cool air. Inside the house, her son slept soundly, completely safe. Across town, her father drove home with a proud and happy heart. And all over the world, women she had helped were beginning new chapters, finding their own power. Finally, Elena set her empty glass down and went inside. She washed the dishes, she tidied the living room, she locked the doors and turned out the lights one by one. Upstairs, she climbed into bed and pulled the blankets close. She was asleep in minutes, a deep and peaceful rest with no nightmares, no sudden fears. It was just quiet. It was just home. If Elena's journey touched your heart today, do me a small favor. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Elena's situation? Share this story with someone who needs to hear that survival is possible, that betrayal doesn't have to be the end. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and tap that notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. Your support means the world to me, and it helps us bring more powerful stories of resilience and justice to women everywhere. This content has been carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and inspiration. Every story we share is crafted with purpose, to remind you that no matter what you're facing, you are never truly alone, and your story is far from over.